Episode 1. The House Beyond the Hill. On the top of a remote hill, far from any main road, there stood a house that almost no one dared to speak of. The townsfolk at the foot of the hill referred to it cautiously, the old house, the dark house, or simply, no one should go there. Stories about the house drifted like mist. People said laughter echoed from the tightly shut windows. Shadowy figures flitted down the hallways, and sometimes at night, a light would flicker with no source of electricity. One drizzling afternoon, 4 teenagers, Mark, Lila, Jonah, and Rachel, decided to climb the hill and see for themselves. They didn't believe the horror stories, or perhaps their curiosity outweighed their fear. The gentle rain fell, blurring the path ahead, making the dirt road leading up to the house feel even more foreboding. As they passed through the rusty iron gate, a cold gust of wind swept past, making them shiver. The house loomed ahead, its white paint faded, roof sagging, windows cracked. The world around it seemed frozen. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, only the smell of damp earth and overgrown grass creeping over the steps. Mark pushed open the front door. A creaking sound echoed, but no one backed down. They stepped inside, the weak light of the afternoon filtering through shattered glass, casting flickering shadows across the dusty floor. Everything was old, yet somehow alive. On the dining table, chairs were seemingly just pulled out, and the paintings on the walls seemed to watch them more than hang. Lila was the first to notice something off. "Do you guys see that painting?" She pointed at an old portrait of a family laughing. But the smiles, when stared at for too long, began to warp. The faces of each family member twisted into grotesque expressions, eyes following every step they took. Jonah forced a laugh, trying to reassure everyone. "It's probably just the light," but his voice trembled. Suddenly, a door to an adjoining room swung open on its own. Everyone froze. Rachel whispered, "Someone's here." No one answered, only a dark, empty space behind the door. Then the sound of footsteps echoed, steady, deliberate, as if someone were pacing the room. Mark stepped forward, mustering courage, but the room was empty. Only a table remained, and on it, a photo frame. A picture of them, standing in this very room, but with hollow white eyes. They looked at each other, panic rising. No one spoke. Only the sound of labored breathing filled the silence. They decided to leave, but as they turned, the door they had just passed through vanished. In its place was a flat wall. A soft, sinister laughter echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Mark grabbed Rachel's hand, pulling everyone along the hallway. With every step, they noticed the paintings along the walls shifting, reflecting their own distorted, terrified images. Some even seemed to reach out, trying to drag them in. As they ran up the old wooden stairs, the laughter intensified. A shadow flickered along the staircase, faint and indistinct, but its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Lila screamed and slipped, almost falling, and when she looked up, the shadow stood right in front of her, faceless, a black void. Jonah lunged forward, pulling Lila to safety, and the group found another room with a window opening to the backyard. They jumped through the window, landing on the wet ground. When they stood up and looked back, the house seemed gone. No foundations, no roof, only the barren hill and drifting fog. Mark checked his phone, and horror struck. In the photo album, there was a picture of them at the front door, but Jonah was missing. No one remembered when he vanished. Only the terrified gaze in the photo remained. The 4 stood in the rain, hearts pounding. realizing they had touched something not of this world. The house beyond the hill, with all its secrets, still existed somewhere, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to enter. And from that day on, stories of the house beyond the hill spread, serving as a warning to anyone too curious. Yet for some, the warning only made the lure stronger. Episode 2, Moonlit Mirror Lake. In the northern edge of town, where the forest thinned and shadows stretched long under the moonlight, lay a lake so still it was like a sheet of glass. The locals called it Mirror Lake, though it had another nickname whispered in hushed tones: Moonlit Mirror Lake. They said that on nights when the moon was full, the lake would reflect faces, not the faces of the living, but of the dead. Nathan, a young writer with a hunger for inspiration, had heard the stories and decided to see the lake for himself. He wanted material for his next novel, proof that the supernatural could exist, proof that fear could be crafted into words. He arrived just as the full moon rose, silver and cold, washing the water in pale light. The air was thick with mist, curling around the reeds like ghostly fingers. The lake was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that made his heartbeat feel louder than it should. As Nathan peered into the water, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. At first it was faint, like a shadow, a ripple that didn't belong. Then, faces began to appear. At first vague and fleeting, a young boy smiling, a woman with hollow eyes. They moved beneath the water, staring up at him, mouths opening and closing, whispering things he could not yet understand. Curiosity overcame fear. Nathan knelt closer. The whispers became words. "We've been waiting. Tell our story." Each voice was layered with sorrow, anger, and terror. The lake, he realized, was not just reflecting the dead, it was speaking through them. As he listened, the surface of the water shifted, and he saw images of the town, past and present. Crimes never solved, tragedies never spoken of, secrets buried in silence. Every face was a memory, every movement a confession. Nathan felt the lake pulling him in, as though it wanted more than just his attention. It wanted his presence. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. Nathan stepped back, shaking, and realized his reflection was no longer his own. His eyes were pale, his expression distorted. He saw himself smiling with a cruel, unnatural grin, lips moving though he said nothing. The whispers grew louder. "Join us. Stay with us." Panic rose in his chest. He stumbled back, the shoreline seeming to stretch farther than it should. When he tried to turn away, he saw them. Figures standing behind him, silent, transparent, yet unmistakably human. The faces of the dead reflected in the water were now mirrored in reality. They reached toward him with trembling hands. Nathan ran. The mist thickened, twisting around his legs, slowing him. He heard laughter, soft at first, then sharp, high-pitched, echoing over the lake. He tripped, fell to his knees, and looked into the water again. The reflection of the lake no longer showed the stars or the moon, but a dark, infinite void. And in that void, he saw himself sinking, swallowed by the water, screaming, but no sound escaped. Somehow, he scrambled to his feet and staggered back toward the road. When he reached the edge of the forest, he turned one last time. The lake was calm again, glassy and still, reflecting the moon as if nothing had happened. But Nathan knew the truth. The lake remembered, and it waited. Back in town, Nathan tried to write down what he had seen. Words failed him. Every description he attempted became twisted, like the lake itself was reshaping his memories. Nights passed, and he dreamed of the faces, the whispers, the cold pull of the water. And then he received a photograph in the mail. No return address, a single image. Nathan standing at Mirror Lake, staring at the water. But the figure in the reflection was not him. It was someone, or something, else, smiling, waiting. From that night on, Nathan never went near the lake. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the moon was full and the air still, he swore he could hear whispers through the walls of his apartment, calling him back, calling him home to the lake. Episode 3: The Stranger Vendor. In a small town at the heart of the region, there was a market that appeared only once a year. No one knew where it came from or when it would vanish, but those lucky enough to see it never forgot. Every stall was filled with strange items: old brass toys, intricately carved wooden masks, thick books with pages that smelled of mildew. And in the farthest corner of the market, there was always a strange vendor. An old man with piercing eyes, long silver hair, and a smile that seemed to know every secret in the world. A young girl named Emma, curious and adventurous, stumbled upon the market on a full autumn night. Her eyes were drawn to an old wooden box, carved with strange symbols, faintly glowing as if alive. She asked the vendor, "How much for this box?" The old man smiled. "This box cannot be sold for money. It demands something else, something you will trade without even knowing." Emma hesitated, but curiosity won and she bought it, taking it home, not realizing that she had just opened a door to another world. That very night, the box opened on its own. Inside was a miniature world, yet more vivid than anything she had ever imagined. Trees swayed, light and shadow intertwined, and space seemed to move with the rhythm of her heartbeat. A whisper echoed, "Play with us. Stay with us." Emma tried to close the box, terrified, but it would not stay shut. Each time she touched it, the box opened again, pulling her deeper into its world. She saw images of herself, actions and thoughts she had never revealed, laid bare before her. The most horrifying thing was the invisible presence watching her from the shadows, waiting to claim her soul. Over the following days, Emma could not sleep. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the scenes inside the box. A distorted room, walls that seemed to breathe, shadows writhing as if alive. The whispers never stopped, and she began to feel she no longer owned the box. One night, curiosity overcame fear, and Emma opened the box one last time. The box shuddered, light blinding, and she was pulled inside. The space twisted and warped around her, and she found herself in a vast room where the spirits of all previous box owners appeared. They looked at her, silent, eyes hollow, full of despair. A voice echoed from the darkness, "Now, you are one of us." There is no escape. Emma ran, but the room stretched endlessly, hallways looping without end, and the invisible entity that had been following her became visible. A faceless figure, moving slowly but deliberately, closing in step by step. Finally, when her strength was spent, she stood frozen in the infinite room, looking around. All the trapped souls turned toward her, and in that moment, Emma understood the horrifying truth. The box was not just a magical object. It was a trap, a prison for curious souls, for those daring enough to explore, who would then become permanent victims. By dawn, the box was found sitting on Emma's table. It looked ordinary, as if nothing had happened, but inside, a faint whisper echoed, a reminder: "Whoever opens me will never escape." From that day on, the story of the stranger vendor spread. serving as a warning to anyone daring enough to seek out the mysteries the world wished to keep hidden. Episode 4: The Everlasting Lantern. In a small town by the river, there was a strange street lamp that no one dared touch. Locals whispered that this lamp had never gone out since it appeared, even though the road it stood on had long been abandoned. Stories about the lantern were chilling. Anyone who stared too long into its light would see their own future, but always a horrifying outcome. A young man named Alex, who had just moved to the town, heard the rumors and felt drawn to the lamp. One night, with a full moon hanging high in the sky, Alex walked to the abandoned street. The lantern stood there, quietly casting a pale yellow glow, almost inviting him closer. He stopped, staring at it, heart pounding. At first, Alex saw only his reflection on the wet pavement. But then the images began to shift. Figures appeared around him, alternate versions of himself, each wearing expressions of terror and despair, some even distorted, as if enduring unimaginable pain. He stepped closer, unable to tear his eyes away from the lamp. Then, he saw glimpses of the future unfold before him. His house engulfed in flames, loved ones turning into malevolent spirits, and himself being dragged into an inescapable darkness. Each vision was etched into his mind, impossible to erase. When Alex panicked and tried to turn away, the light of the lantern did not dim. It seemed to hold him in place, controlling both time and space around him. A low, clear whisper echoed. "No one escapes. The future is already written." Alex ran toward his home, but the roads twisted and looped like a labyrinth. The figures in the light pursued him, the space around him warped, each step making him feel increasingly powerless. A light rain began to fall, and the lantern flickered as if trying to consume everything. Exhausted, Alex fell to the wet pavement and looked up. His reflection in the light had completely transformed, a new entity, violent and separate from himself. He realized the horrifying truth. Anyone who stared too long into the lantern would no longer be themselves. The lamp not only showed the future, it controlled the present, turning humans into ghosts of their own destiny. By dawn, Alex had vanished. The townspeople only found footprints on the wet road, but no sign of him anywhere. The lantern remained pale and silent, as if no one had ever passed by. Some said that when its light touched their eyes, they saw what would happen to them, but always horrifying visions, leaving them terrified, too afraid to return. And from that day on, the everlasting lantern became a warning, a phenomenon that reminded the curious. Sometimes, even light can be a trap. Episode 5: The Abandoned Magic Shop. At the end of an old street in town, there was a small shop that no one seemed to remember ever opening. On its sign, the letters had faded, leaving only part of the words. The Magic Shop. Locals whispered that it had once belonged to a famous magician who lived and performed there, but after one stormy night, the shop vanished from the map, as if it had never existed. Maya, a young woman fascinated by the strange and unusual, decided to find the abandoned shop. It stood between two old buildings, its wooden door cracked, and the glass windows thick with dust. When she pushed the door open, a cold breeze swept out, carrying the scent of old paper and burnt candle wax from inside. Inside, everything remained intact. Old decks of cards, dusty magicians' hats, convex mirrors on the walls reflecting the dim glow from an oil lamp. But Maya sensed something unusual. The space seemed alive, every object vibrating as if it had its own breath. She stepped closer to the counter where a thick book lay open. The letters on the pages shifted before her eyes, telling the stories of those who had entered the shop before. Maya read the final line. "Whoever reads this book will become a permanent part of the magic." Her heart raced, but curiosity overcame fear. At that moment, a soft laugh echoed from one of the convex mirrors. Maya looked in and saw her own reflection, but with pale, empty eyes, a cold, lifeless stare. When she tried to step back, the figure in the mirror advanced, as if trying to pull her inside. She attempted to flee, but the space outside seemed to twist. The shop grew larger, the hallways stretched endlessly, and all exits disappeared. The magical items on the shelves began to move, floating into the air and forming grotesque shapes, seemingly targeting her. Maya screamed, leaping onto an old performance platform, and saw within the mirror an invisible entity, towering and filling the room. It leaned down, its eyes blazing, and a voice echoed in her mind. "You will stay forever a part of the magic." Time lost all meaning. Maya felt her body weaken, her consciousness being pulled from the real world, merging with the objects around her. Everything around her moved, sounds echoing from the decks of cards, the hats, the mirrors, as if celebrating her capture. By dawn, the magic shop appeared normal again. The glass windows were still dusty, the items on the shelves untouched. But one horrifying truth remained. Maya had never left the shop. Only the open book on the counter showed a new line. "Another soul has joined the eternal magic." And from that day on, the abandoned magic shop became a legend, a warning to the curious. Sometimes curiosity does not lead to knowledge. It leads to losing oneself forever. Episode 6. The Vanishing Train. On nights when the fog hung thick, the old railroad on the outskirts of town would echo with the shrill whistle of a train. Locals said there was a mysterious train that appeared without a schedule, and anyone who boarded it would vanish without a trace. They called it the Vanishing Train. Lucas, a young journalist fascinated by the paranormal, decided to investigate. He arrived at the old station on a foggy night, as the dim yellow lights flickered weakly. The silence was complete, broken only by the wind whistling through the rails. Then, a train emerged from the mist. It was old, worn, and rusted, but the light from its carriages glowed a pale, warm yellow, inviting him aboard. Lucas stepped on, a chill running down his spine. Inside, there were no passengers, only the creaking floorboards and the scent of old engine oil. As he walked through the carriages, he noticed the paintings on the walls were not ordinary. They moved, depicting scenes of people who had once boarded the train, their faces twisted with terror and despair. Whispers echoed from everywhere. There is no escape. No one returns. He reached the last carriage, where a single empty seat awaited. When he sat down, the light inside shifted. Lucas saw another passenger, a faceless black figure with glowing eyes. The figure leaned down, its hands reaching toward him, and a voice echoed in his mind. "You have boarded. You cannot leave." Lucas tried to stand, but the floor seemed to hold him in place. The carriage stretched endlessly, the windows showing ever-changing scenes. Dark forests, abandoned cities, distorted humans, all staring at him with hollow eyes. Time aboard the train lost all meaning. Lucas felt fear seep into every cell of his body. His consciousness began to fragment, merging into the darkness around him. The train's whistle blew, but it signaled nothing, only the rhythm of an endless nightmare. By dawn, the train came to a stop, but Lucas was gone. Locals only found an empty seat in the last carriage and a torn newspaper, its headline reading, "This train, no one returns." From that day on, the story of the vanishing train spread, warning the curious to think twice before boarding a mysterious train on a foggy night. A reminder, sometimes stepping onto a strange journey can lead to disappearance forever. Episode 7. The Forgotten Hotel. On a desolate road outside town stood an old, abandoned hotel. Its name long faded, the Forgotten Hotel. Locals whispered that it had once been a luxurious retreat, but after a series of mysterious events, it was left to decay. Anyone who accidentally stepped inside reportedly could not find the exit, or became part of the terrifying stories told around campfires. Ethan, a writer specializing in supernatural phenomena, heard about the hotel and decided to visit, hoping to find material for his next novel. When he arrived, the fading sunset cast long, distorted shadows across dusty windows and the creaking wooden floors. The heavy door groaned as he pushed it open, and Ethan stepped into a space so still, it felt as if time itself had stopped. Inside, a hallway stretched endlessly, lined with locked rooms and dim, dusty windows. Ethan walked forward, his footsteps echoing, but the more he walked, the more the space twisted. The corridors bent and curved, and he could no longer recognize the way out. On the walls, old paintings seemed to come alive. Shadowy figures appeared, blurry, moving as if observing him. When Ethan opened the final door, he entered a grand hall with a burnt-out censer and old chairs arranged in a circle. At the center stood a large mirror, its wooden frame intricately carved. When Ethan looked into it, the reflection was not him. It was another version, distorted, with pale eyes and a sinister grin. Whispers filled the hall. "Stay. Become a part of the hotel." Ethan panicked and tried to turn back, but the hallways had vanished, replaced by endless darkness. Every step he took felt like falling into a labyrinth. Every room reflected him, and Ethan, desperate and terrified. Time lost all meaning. Ethan felt his body grow heavy, his consciousness slowly merging with the darkness around him, blending into the souls trapped before him. The sounds of the hall, the chairs, the mirror, every painting seemed to cheer for his entrapment. By dawn, the hotel was silent again, as if no one had entered, but Ethan had disappeared. Locals only saw closed doors, layers of dust, faint footprints leading into the main hall, and a message appearing on the large mirror. Another soul has joined the Forgotten Hotel. The hotel became a warning. Abandoned places are not just memories. They can trap anyone curious enough to enter, turning them into part of the eternal darkness. Episode 8. The Haunting Lighthouse. On a remote cliff by the sea stood an ancient lighthouse covered in moss, standing alone against the wind and crashing waves. The villagers along the coast whispered that anyone who climbed the lighthouse at night would hear footsteps, distant calls, and sometimes see ghostly figures drifting between the floors. They called it the Haunting Lighthouse. Clara, a researcher of paranormal phenomena, heard the story and decided to investigate. She climbed the steep stone path, the sea wind howling, waves slamming against the cliffs as if warning her. The lighthouse towered before her, its old wooden door creaking when she pushed it open. Inside, a spiral staircase wound upward to the lantern room. The dim light from small windows cast distorted shadows along the walls. Clara felt the oppressive atmosphere, as if the lighthouse itself was breathing, watching her every step. When she reached the top, where the beacon still burned, Clara saw strange visions. The shadow of an old lighthouse keeper standing between light and darkness. The figure turned toward her, face hollow, eyes empty, staring straight at her. A whisper echoed in her mind. The light never goes out, and the curious will remain forever. Clara tried to leave, but the spiral staircase stretched endlessly. With every step, the ghosts around her became clearer, moving slowly but deliberately, as if trying to drag her down to the lower floors, where souls had been trapped long ago. Time inside the lighthouse lost all meaning. Clara felt her body grow light as mist, her consciousness being pulled toward the light, yet simultaneously dragged into the surrounding darkness. The sound of the ocean outside faded. All she could hear were the invisible footsteps of the trapped souls. By dawn, the lighthouse was silent, as if no one had entered. Clara had disappeared. The villagers only found the wooden door closed, faint footprints on the stone path, and the beacon still shining, as if sending a warning. Whoever climbs never leaves. The haunting lighthouse became a timeless warning. Sometimes, light does not save. It traps the curious in the eternal darkness of the sea. Episode 9. The Whispering Forest. On the outskirts of town lay a dense, foreboding forest that locals rarely dared to enter. They called it the Whispering Forest, for anyone passing through could hear faint whispers drifting from the trees, the wind, and the shadows. Legends warned that anyone who listened too long would become lost in the forest, never to find their way out. Nathan, a young man fascinated by mysteries, decided to enter the forest to test himself. At first, it was just tall, ancient trees, casting deep shadows over the forest floor. But as he ventured deeper, the air grew heavy, and the whispers circled his ears, as if the very forest was watching and speaking to him. The whispers were unintelligible at first, but gradually Nathan began to hear his own name, his private thoughts, his deepest fears. A clear voice spoke. "We know you. You shouldn't have come here." Nathan panicked and tried to turn back, but the path behind him seemed to vanish. The forest came alive. Dark shapes slithered from the roots, trunks bent as if possessed by their own consciousness. Nathan ran, but every path twisted and shifted, trapping him in an endless labyrinth. The whispers never ceased, each word embedding itself in his mind, awakening fears he had long hidden. Finally, Nathan reached a clearing where moonlight fell in a pale circle on the ground. As he stepped into it, the shadows paused, yet the space around him trembled, time losing all meaning. A voice echoed in his mind. "Now you are part of the forest. You will never leave." The next morning, villagers passing the forest found only his abandoned backpack. Nathan had vanished. The whispers continued, a reminder to the curious. The Whispering Forest is not just trees and darkness. It is a living entity that holds tight to anyone who dares enter. The forest became a warning. Sometimes, curiosity does not lead to knowledge. it leads to losing oneself, forever trapped in the shadows. Episode 10. The Last Tape. In town, there was a small, abandoned room where people found an old box containing a partially damaged cassette tape. Rumors claimed that anyone who played this tape would hear the final story, a story that connected all the strange phenomena: the everlasting lantern, the abandoned magic shop, the vanishing train, the forgotten hotel, the haunting lighthouse, and the whispering forest. Oliver, a man fascinated by mysteries, curiously opened the box. The old cassette player started with a hiss of static before a calm, measured voice spoke. "If you're hearing this, you've already opened the box." The voice recounted all the events in order, connecting them as if each strange occurrence had been part of a grand design. As Oliver listened, he realized a horrifying truth. Every story he had read, heard, or even witnessed had been sent from a single source. Someone, himself, from the future. The voice continued, "I am you from the future. Every warning, every trapped soul is meant to show you that you have become part of this loop." Oliver looked around the room, a chill running down his spine. Shadows from the previous stories seemed to emerge in the corners, their eyes fixed on him. He realized that listening to the tape was not just hearing, it was participating. The tape continued with vague sounds, whispers from the souls who had been trapped. Oliver felt his consciousness begin to merge with the flow, unable to escape. Everything spun around him, reality and memory blending, sending him into panic. When the tape ended, only absolute silence remained. The old box sat there, as if it had never been opened, but Oliver had vanished. From that day forward, anyone who found the tape would hear the stories again and become a part of the horrifying loop. The final words echoed, "If you're hearing this, you've already opened the box." The series concluded with a chilling reminder. Sometimes, curiosity does not lead to knowledge. It leads to becoming part of the very horror story you are listening to.